Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 24th November 2023. My name is TSV Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. HARDAN, 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 Haribol, TRSV, Nectar, NECTAR, Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been discussing about the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been doing in all my previous videos. Kindly subscribe to this vlog and press the bell icon so that I may keep reminding you of all my previous, present, and future videos. So let us continue with the topic of discussion for today's video. In the past few videos, we have been trying to discuss and analyze the actual identity of self. By now, we all know that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has two types of energies. One is called spiritual and the other is called material. The spiritual energy is supposed to be the superior one, and the material energy is supposed to be the inferior one. However, before we hasten towards some conclusion, we must remember that both the superior as well as the inferior energy is pertaining to the Supreme Personality of Godhead alone. Both energies belong to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu. Hence, none should get complacent, overconfident, or think that he or she, as an individual, can lord it over the other. This would be an extremely foolhardy decision. But alas, several of us keep thinking like this, and hence sooner or later come to unimaginable grief. And how? Let us continue. The spiritual energy is in a form of spirit whole. This spirit whole is a collective place like a fireplace which is burning and crackling merrily. There is a collective spiritual energy which is supposed to be the superior of the two energies. However, from this spirit whole, some foolhardy, ignorant, impetuous, complacent spirit sparks advertently or inadvertently, deliberately or otherwise, knowingly or unknowingly, by default or by design, get ejected out of this spirit soul hole. As I had mentioned earlier, this spirit hole is like a fireplace. Just like some sparks fly out of that fireplace continuously, similarly, spirit sparks get ejected out of the spirit hole and they start floating in the ether or space meaninglessly. When the fire spark gets ejected out of the fireplace, it sooner or later gets extinguished by the air around. But a spirit soul is too powerful, even though it is minuscule and individual, to be extinguished by any element, whether it is ether, air, or any such element. Hence, despite getting ejected out of the spirit hole, every individual spirit spark keeps its identity as a spiritual energy. This makes that spirit spark more and more ignorant and complacent. After floating in the space aimlessly in a trance for times immemorial, this spirit spark one day notices the material world. Old memories come to the fore. This spirit spark realizes that it is a part of the superior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that this material world is the inferior energy of the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. Here, this spirit spark conveniently chooses to believe that it is a minuscule part of spiritual energy and both energies actually belong to the Supreme Personality of Godhead alone and not to anyone else. Because of this careless complacence, this spirit spark decides to lord it over the inferior material energy. This complacence brings it closer to the otherwise reluctant material world, so much so that one day it comes under the gravitational orbit of that material world and gets connected to it. The moment this spirit spark gets in touch with the material world, it loses its identity as a spirit spark and dawns another identity as an individual spirit soul. This individual spirit soul was once a spirit spark which had got ejected from the spirit whole. As soon as this spirit soul gets in touch with the material world gets extremely irritated. It does not appreciate such indiscreet touch by the spirit soul, regardless of the fact that qualitatively this minuscule spirit soul is a part of the superior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and this material world is the inferior energy. However, we must hasten to add that while this spirit soul, which is the superior energy, is minuscule and so quite weak in size and strength, the material energy, though inferior, is huge in size and hence quite powerful. When this touch between the individual spirit soul and the material world happens, to avoid that irritation which had arisen because of this touch, the material world begins to wrap 4 layers of material body around that spirit soul. This is precisely like when an oyster is lying in the ocean with its wide mouth open, trying to attract some food particle, and some other foreign particle falls into the open mouth and irritates that oyster. To avoid that irritation, this oyster surrounds or envelops or wraps its own saliva around that foreign particle to such an extent that one day that foreign particle becomes a ball of saliva. This saliva turns that price that useless foreign particle into a priceless pearl because of that saliva. Similarly, that ignorant spirit spark turned spirit soul, one wrapped up by the four layers of material body by the material world to avoid the irritation caused by such attraction becomes a living entity. Initially, it was a spirit spark, then it became a spirit soul, and now, after being wrapped by this material body and its layers, becomes what is known as a living entity. These four layers of the material world are as follows. The first layer closest to that individual spirit soul is known as the causal body of intelligence and logic. The second layer that envelops both this causal body and the spirit soul is known as the astral body of mind, feelings, and emotions. The third body, which envelops this astral body, causal body, and spirit soul, is known as the etheric body of senses. These senses are five in number. They are sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. These three are these five senses are still a part of ether. Ether is the main ingredient that makes up these three bodies into subtle bodies. These three causal body, astral body, and etheric body are etheric and subtle in nature, and so they are invisible to the naked eyes of the fourth body called the gross body. This gross body, which identifies this living entity into the material society, is made up of four material elements. These four elements are air, fire, water, and earth. This gross body is the actual shell which envelops the spirit soul, the causal body of intelligence and logic, the astral body of mind, feelings, and emotions, and the etheric body of five senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. As mentioned before, these senses are still etheric in nature, but they get an outlet through the sense organs that are present in the fourth layer called gross body. These sense organs are as follows: two eyes for the etheric sense of sight, two nostrils for the etheric sense of smell, two ears for the etheric sense of hearing, one tongue for the etheric sense of taste, and the whole skin and genitals for the etheric senses of touch. Thus, the five senses get an outlet into the society of a living entity through his or her five sense organs. This is the ultimate capsule that makes up a living entity. The moment a living entity comes into existence, he or she keeps floating in this material world aimlessly till one day he or she gets in touch with an endless cycle of births and deaths. I said he or she. Actually, I should have said it because a living entity is just that. It. It has no sex as such in the beginning. As soon as this living entity becomes a part of a cycle of endless births and deaths, it starts getting birth in that endless cycle, first as a cell, then as algae, then amoeba, then weeds, shrubs, grass, plants, creepers, trees, worms, insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, bees, beasts, and finally human beings. A living entity becomes a human being only after passing through the cycle of various births as those birds, bees, etc. As long as that a living entity is born in any species except the human one, it carries only its superconscious memories in its psyche. The idea of destiny or karma does not apply to that a living entity till it gets birth as a human being. There are 400,000 species of human beings, and every living entity has to take birth in at least 50% of such categories in the human species before it comes to the spiritual path. The idea of destiny or karma begins from this living entity's first birth as a human being, regardless of the position that species is in. As soon as destiny and karma start operating for a living entity, the karma or actions or efforts of that living entity in that first birth start operating and coming into existence. It has been mentioned by spiritualists of yore that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, whether that action by the living entity had been done knowingly or unknowingly. There is no excuse. Destiny and karma play their part equally without any prejudice in the lives of every living entity which has taken a human birth. This karma may be like as you sow, so you reap. If you sow bad karma or bad seeds of karma, then you will get the results of that karma in bad form. This happens to indifferent as well as good karma. Good karma brings good results. Indifferent karma brings indifferent results, and bad karma brings bad results for that particular living entity. In one birth, the karma or destiny or efforts in that particular lifetime usually gets worked out in that particular lifetime itself. But this is not necessary. A lot of unworked karma of an individual living entity get stored at the end of the lifetime of that living entity in a storage called Sanchit Karma, which becomes embedded into the psyche and superconscious memory of that living entity. As soon as one lifetime ends, this living entity has to take birth as a human being in another birth. This another birth is used or it gets a foundation on which that particular lifetime is based for that living entity. Every living entity gets birth on the foundation on which it has to build its own life in a particular birth and lifetime. This foundation is nothing but a slice of the same storage of Sanchit Karma which this living entity had stored in psyche or superconscious memory. This slice of karma is known as prarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma becomes the foundation for the next birth of that living entity alone. In other words, the lifetime of the next birth depends on the prarabdha karma that this living entity came with in a particular lifetime or birth. However, there is another category which is known as Kriyaman Karma. Kriyaman Karma is nothing but the free will that God or destiny has awarded to every living entity in a lifetime to be used during that lifetime according to his or her free will. This Kriyamana karma begins to give birth to further new karma in the psyche, destiny, and future of that living entity. We shall continue this particular discussion in my next video. This is all I wanted to say in this particular video about karma, living entities, destiny, spirit spark, sweet soul, and other such spiritual and material matters. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this very important matter in the lives of a living entity. Please give me your own expert views, thoughts, ideas, and opinions so that I may blend everything together for the sake of this society. Before concluding, let me remind you that I am also a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.